Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined us. My name is Helen Durham, and I have the great pleasure of being the CEO of RedR Australia, and an even greater pleasure of being the facilitator for this event, from listening to practice and listening very carefully to traditional knowledge in disaster risk reduction. So, dear friends and colleagues, the humanitarian and international development sector are currently, of course, facing formidable challenges. We see increasing needs with drastically reduced funding. We see a shifting political discourse and a commitment to assist communities beyond our own shores limiting. We, of course, see the dramatic shutdown of life-saving programs from across the world, which we know has an asymmetrical impact on women and girls and people living with disabilities. Despite their extremely valuable role in communities during crisis and long-term development, there's a strong risk of them being sidelined. Now, concurrently, we are also witnessing a growing complexity of conflicts, with many regions experiencing prolonged, multi-layered crisis, where political instability and armed conflict and humanitarian needs are intertwined. Now, this has made it harder, of course, for international organisations to provide aid for local communities and to let them access resources. And in many of these situations, it has become increasingly difficult for vulnerable populations to obtain life-saving support due to insecurity, I would say, restrictions and shifting political landscapes. Now, my dear colleagues and friends, this is the backdrop to the issues which we wish to address today in this particular session, and that is the increasing frequency and severity of climate change related disasters. We know we are seeing extreme weather events such as cyclones, floods, and droughts that have displaced millions of people and strained humanitarian responses. Now, all of this highlights the need for more adaptive and sustainable disaster preparedness strategies. So, in this context, it's so important to be clear-eyed and strategic about our future direction. I think we all knew that this sector we deeply believe in has needed changes. It needs pivots to adjust to new realities. And I think when we look back in the last few decades, we do see extraordinary evolutions in our thinking and, more importantly, in our practice. But at the moment, with heavier state-centric focus on the horizon, and in particular in the area of DRR, we must shift our focus to putting locally led responses in the centre. So looking to the future, the sector must listen and expand more inclusive understandings that lift effective and affected communities. Of course, this all involves those complicated things, building trust, fostering collaboration, and integrating traditional knowledge into systems, into modern systems, will be essential in creating resilience and durable solutions. So it's taking that traditional knowledge, highlighting it, and integrating it or synthesizing it with modern systems. That's what today's session is all about. Local and traditional knowledge passed down through generations plays a critical role in strengthening local preparedness for and recovery from disasters, and highlights the importance of integrating indigenous wisdom with contemporary DRR strategies. We need more effective but more culturally appropriate responses to climate-related challenges, not just within the Pacific region, where a lot of our speakers today are from, but across all Indigenous communities. And guess what? All we need to do is listen more carefully, absorb more deeply, and work together. So in this time of sometimes overwhelming challenges, there is more than a shimmer of light on the horizon. There's things we can do. Now, that's enough for me. I'm really interested in hearing more from the panel. And let me introduce our three extraordinary speakers. Our first one is Simi. He is the Pacific Field Officer for CBM Australia and a current roster member for RedR Australia. Now, Simi specialises in disability, inclusion, disaster risk reduction, and community development. He has extensive experience in policy development, training, and strategic planning. And what is amazing with his work, and I've been able to witness it, is he integrates disability inclusive responses into climate action and disaster preparedness. He's worked across governments, not-for-profits, and international organisations. So I welcome you, Simi. Thank you for joining us. And a part of his work is also he's really passionate about empowering marginalised groups, and he designs the training programs and competence frameworks with this in mind. So it'd be great to hear from you. Our next speaker will be Vuli, and he is a humanitarian leader and a RedR roster member, and he has nearly 30 years experience in disaster preparedness, response and recovery. He's a highly respected humanitarian leader, a RedR roster member, very proud of our roster members. It's a wonderful family to be part of. And he's also a very experienced trainer, well known throughout the Pacific for his work developing and facilitating training, with many years of experience with the Fiji Red Cross, our good friends in the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, NDMOs across the Pacific and Australian regions. So once again, it's a real pleasure to have him join us. And finally, we have Georgina. Now, Georgina is a gender equity, disability and social inclusion and disaster risk reduction technical advisor. It's a lot of words, but basically she does amazing things in listening to the community and pivoting work in that regard. Last year, she completed a year-long project with the Fijian Council of Social Services. It was a RedR project, working with women in remote communities in Fiji to connect them with what they need to do to better prepare for a disaster season. So she has some real experience in understanding how we can move from listening to practice. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a setup for what we've got. I will be having questions for our fabulous panelists. And of course, if we have time, and hopefully we will have time, at the end, we'd really welcome your engagement, your questions, your comments. What I would suggest is if you could pop that when the time's right in the chat box. It's sometimes hard as a facilitator to sort of focus on the fabulous discussions and the chat box, but I will certainly keep an eye on that once we've heard from our special speakers. So, okay, let's do what is always very, I think, logical. Let's start at the beginning, and maybe with Simi and Vuli, perhaps could you explain or share with us what was it like growing up in Fiji, and from your childhood and your experiences, how did community and traditional practices shape your work in the area of disaster preparedness? And perhaps we'll start first with you, Simi.
Hi, thanks, Helen. Bula everyone, and I'm very privileged to be here. For me, in terms of the growing up in Fiji, most of our disaster preparedness habits is influenced by traditional knowledge and practices. And this is also influenced in terms of the different environmental changes that occurs in the place that we live in. Just to provide a little bit of context, I grew up in my island, which is called Nairai Island, which is about 8 hours boat ride away from Suva. in the village of Notoloa and in a province that right in the center of Fiji. And in my island, in terms of environmental changes, the most of the we don't have infrastructure for proper electricity that powers up radios in terms of the source around early warnings in terms of weather changes and disaster events. Our major source of information in terms of different of these different events is through the knowledge that we have in our community, and that is observing changes in the environment, also observing the behaviors of animals, and also the patterns of fruiting and flowering of plants around us. And these provide us with enough knowledge to enable us to be able to carry out different preparedness action as different patterns, different behaviors of animals, and different environmental indicators provide us with enough, it gives us timelines in terms of when different events are coming. And in the island that I grew up in, there are other islands that are up around the horizon, and a couple of the islands they only appear during bad weather or when there's a severe weather approaching. Um, and and this usually comes up a week or a day or so before the events, and it gives us enough time to prepare ourselves. And with this knowledge that we have, it impacts how we do preparedness. It impacts in terms of how do we ensure that we strengthen our food security, and also it influences the practices that we do in terms of food storage, food preservations, and also in terms of what we plant, when and where we plant. And these are all impacted by these different behaviors and knowledge that we have within our community. The other one is in terms of the way we prepare our families, and also the community that we live in plays a very big role, because this during any disaster events or any severe weather events, um, this is the social safety net for us as a community, family, and the church, which provide us that safety net that enable us to be able to look after each other, also be able to go and talk to each other and provide that first psychosocial first aid that's provided within the place that we live. This is way before any professional or technical help is provided in this space. We create our own activities and our own practices to ensure that we're able to recover quickly from the trauma of the events, and then again go back in ensuring that we have food security, water security, and then relooking at how we can start building back in terms of early recovery work, and then awaiting for any external support or humanitarian aid in the community that we live in. And then when as I grow in terms of the work that I do through the various roles that I have played in my professional career, this knowledge and this upbringing does not really get away from me, but it I keep using it to integrate it into what I do and how I do my work, regardless of the community that I'm in, and also in terms of the stakeholder or the groups that I represent within the sector. And it strengthens my messaging. It strengthens the type of information that I provide, and also it strengthens the the linkages and the systemic work that needs to be done to ensure long lasting impacts and also long lasting outcomes in terms of disaster preparedness and response. Um, and and I believe throughout these different experiences, also gives me it also influences the way I think and also the way I do work in terms of coming into an environment or coming into a country, coming into a community, the need to recognize that that community have their own knowledge, that community have their own practices, and linking what you're bringing into what they already have, for me, is really important, in order to have lasting impacts within that community. And that's something that I learned growing up. When people are coming in and they're able to link what they're bringing to what we already have, it strengthens our recovery, and also it strengthens our resilience as a community, in terms of ensuring preparedness, ensuring better practices, in terms of the way we work, and again, fully recognizing that in every community, the role of the family and beliefs and culture of the people is really important to recognize when we are coming in to do work within the community. Hence, the art of listening first to the community before we really go in and do the work that we do as humanitarian actors. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Simi. I think that you've given us in a very short time huge amount of wisdom. I wish we had more time to unpack all of that, but what I'm hearing is the need for us to understand the holistic system that you talked about, from where you plant the crops to the infrastructure of psychosocial support, and that exists, and that we can't come in and layer something on top of that without really understanding it. So really profound. Thank you. Vuli, would you like to add to that from your experiences?
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Simi, for that elaborate experience. I'm also from the islands of Fiji. It's about 6 hours or 8 hours by boat ride from where Simi grew up, towards Tonga. So yes, just along the lines of Simi's beautiful explanations. Um, I 44 years ago, a cyclone happened in the island where I was growing up, and it was devastating. Before Cyclone Winston, that was one of the most damaging cyclones that have ever affected Fiji, and I was unfortunate enough that I grew up in that space. I guess with early warning. It During that period, I was just 2 years old, and most of the stories of survival was told to be by my grandmother, who basically saved me from the tidal waves and the winds. And I basically have embraced the idea of traditional early warnings and traditional knowledge ever since that time, because during the late 70s, the communities in Fiji, as they were developing post independence, the introduction of different types of buildings were quickly being accepted in most parts of Fiji, particularly the isolated islands. And so the dependence on radio signal, which was only one station at that time that used to cover the whole of Fiji, that was also used to transmit early warning to our islands. And from what I experienced back then, which every time that I work today, I still use that as an example, because it was an important lesson that was unfortunately cost a lot of lives of families from that island where I'm from, um, because everyone was relying on what the weather information was being given by the government over the radio, that the path of the cyclone was not going to our island, was not in the path of the cyclone. So everybody took it for granted, that it was going to affect the northern part of Laos only instead of the southern part where I'm from. And that was that. Overnight, the waves built up, and early in the morning, the strong winds came, and all of a sudden, everybody found out that we were in the direct path of the cyclone. By that time, it was pretty much too late to run, and there was only because the housing were transitional. There was a lot of people died because of flying tins, and was swept away by the waves because we didn't have the time to run up the hill. The point of my story was ever since that time, after that survival, every time there was a radio message that came to our island, and I remember this specifically for the later 10 years of my living, growing up on the island before I came to the city. Um, the village basically went back to observing traditional warning signs. When the birds would come close to the land, they no longer listen to the radio. So sometimes 2 days or 1 week before the cyclones would cross over the Lau group in east of Fiji, everyone had designated caves that we would run to. So basically, in the later 10 years of my life in primary school, we used to enjoy that as kids growing up, running up to the caves, and we knew exactly what the I mean, from my point of view, I knew exactly why we were running there because we had the experience. So over and I guess the experience also shaped the way that the reason that I got involved in humanitarian work. And the experience also, I guess, gave much more seriousness to the passion that drives my commitment to ensuring that same things don't happen to other communities in Fiji or the Pacific or the rest of the world. And I guess I think that maybe later it'll be captured in the discussion, but I think the concern at the moment is that the people that are in my age group are the ones that are being responsible now as leaders of organizations and countries who should not only embrace the rapid inclusion, I guess, or challenging the digital divide that many of these Pacific Island countries and the rest of the world are experiencing with the lack of early warning information that the communities reach, but also to embrace the things that they were taught in the past, and those two things should be going together instead of just pursuing one end of the technology or early warning. Thank you, Helen.
No, thank you very much. And I think it's a sobering reminder. So thank you for unpacking that for us, that we can tend to get a little bit seduced with new technologies, new ways of doing things. But as you've clearly unpacked for us, understanding the environment, knowing the environment, as you say, growing up in the environment will tell you more. Simi, I wondered if you had any more examples on that. I know that you've sometimes spoken about the importance of something like breadfruit, a fruit actually giving incredible warnings to help us with disaster risk reduction. I'm wondering if you could unpack that example for us, because I think it tells us a lot about how we need to not only listen, but act differently in our sector. So maybe over to you, Simi, to talk about the breadfruit.
Thank you, Helen. Just to my in my island, the breadfruit tree is like it grows everywhere, and every villager would own a breadfruit tree. Every household would have a breadfruit tree outside their home, and it's like the flower of the island. And during for breadfruit in my island, the norm is it usually fruit in one branch. It usually fruit one or two fruit at a time. And for very rare occasion, it fruits 3 or more fruit in one branch. And when that changes happen, it tells us that couple of months down the line, there will be a cyclone that will be crossing our island, and we need to start preparing. And if not a cyclone, it'd be a very severe weather that will impact our food security, our livelihood, and also our ways of movement. This is something that we really very appreciative too, because in our island, boats usually comes once a month. Um, and and sometimes when we are in our island, it's there's no there's the village shops usually run out of stocks before the next boat it is in, and these boat schedules it's scheduled for a month, but sometimes it misses and it comes in the alternate month, and that again you have to keep relying on your local resources and local food sources, and then when disaster strikes, it it really puts pressure on our food sources in terms of the amount of food in the village, as most of crops should be uprooted. But with this kind of signs, like the breadfruit, like the island, as Wooly has alluded to earlier, around the birds that comes to the lands, it gives us the timestamps in terms of what kind of actions do we need to do. Uh, and and when we see the breadfruit comes fruiting in threes and fours, what we usually do is we plant two kinds of crops. One is called the kumala, or the sweet potato, and the other one is called the via, which is a taro kind of that is planted in the mud. Which when the wind comes, it's really hard for it to be uprooted. And for sweet potato, it's a creeping plant and usually creeps on the ground. Uh, and, um, and then when the wind blows, it can just take away the leaves, but not the fruit, which you can eat for so many months if it's already underground. And then that's the practice that happens when the breadfruit comes. And this knowledge, for those of us that have learned it growing up, it's really sacred, and it's something that we really treasure in terms of, because we've seen how it has allowed us to ensure food security, and also how it has saved us from not having enough food, and also being heavily reliant on external food sources when disaster events happens in our island. And this kind of knowledge is something that at the moment we feel that it's not being passed intergenerationally from our elders to the young people, and then the young people onwards to the generation after them. Hence, we're very passionate about pushing the need to systematize the traditional knowledge into um, science that enables early warning, that enables disaster preparedness, and also that strengthens disaster response, regardless of the community that we are responding to. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. I think that is such a profound example of the capacity to absorb and understand and read your environment. So thank you. I think this idea that the particular fruit tell you the type of crops that you should plant to make sure that you're resilient. I mean, I think we could, all have a seminar, breadfruit, the resilience of communities. And I'm sure that's just a tiny example. And just in the Pacific, I'm sure across the globe, there are many, many others. I notice we've got people joining us from across the world. I see someone from Athens, and I know many other countries. So thank you. We sometimes don't get the time to unpack. we talk at the meta level, but to unpack the examples that really make it clear that there are systems that work that we need to amplify further. So I think I've heard from both of you sort of some of the challenges and some of the, I would say, disjointedness that occurs when new technologies, new systems, people in organizations coming in and imposing things and not letting the real work to be done. So I've heard that from both of you, and thank you. I appreciate that. I'm wondering whether, Vuli, we could go back to you and whether you have any examples, on the other hand, where local and community driven risk reduction and practices, disaster risk reduction practices, have complemented or where we've seen them to enhance the more formalized disaster management efforts. And with your examples, I know this is a big ask, but could this model be scaled up more globally? So maybe over to you, Vuli, on the ideas where it's worked, we've synthesized them together.
Yes, thank you, Helen. The models that we use in the Pacific for disaster preparedness planning, I guess, to one end is compact, and I guess that for practitioners that work in the community, it becomes much more the application of concepts that are learned from other parts of the world become much more practical, because our communities are smaller, and disasters, although they don't happen a lot, and the scales are very different compared to other countries in the world. But our interpretation of disasters and emergencies is also different, because for us, a house fire in an island could be considered something that overwhelms the community, and something like a storm surge. So the level of action, although it doesn't make the news, it doesn't make examples that are presentable to large audience. It is something that is part of our daily lives in the Pacific. Every time there's a king tide somewhere in the Pacific, or in some coastal areas in Fiji, the community is responding. And so, looking at it from the point of view of how to effectively support or complement efforts of the communities. And I think Sim has already alluded to this as well. It's the point is listening, and things like introduction of technology, to simple things like introducing sustainable methods of assistance, such as food rations, for example. In my experience, for all the years that I've been responding, and also when I was growing up, when the food was distributed to the island, it was really just complementing what the island was already have been using as a measure of response that they have passed on to each other for generations, and therefore, over the years, the dependency syndrome is I guess the argument in terms of government planning, which when you go to the community, they really just this is part of their way of life. The cyclones hit them, they recover the next day, next week, but not I guess the way the government responses and responsibility to help its people is prioritized over consulting the community. It is the challenge that I see at the moment. If the two don't look at each other in the right way, the community interventions will always be very expensive compared to what the community really thinks it could cost, and also the sustainability of the actions it could be challenged. So replicating things like that could be introduced globally. The Pacific is a good example because our operations are smaller and they are compact, even though they are isolated. The mechanics of how the agencies and the communities are interacting with each other continually. So whenever the 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 community, I guess, um, plans for something that they would like something that concerns the development or response or anything like that. It may look as simple as like a village meeting, and from the untrained eye, that could look like something that's not really, that doesn't even have enough substance for it to be, for it to be replicated elsewhere. But like Simi said, a lot of listening has to be made, and I guess also from Georgina's experience working with the local community organizations in Fiji, when the communities are being listened, no understands that they are being listened to, and they are being given a position of empowerment for them to be able to help you, help the person that's conducting the intervention with the community to support them. The richness of the information and the advice that will come from the community will only happen when that partnership and trust is built. So there's a lot of listening, like Simi said, and the trust has to happen. I'm not saying that the Pacific is a perfect picture. Of course, in many parts of the Pacific, it's paradise. But like I said, when disasters happen, it does put a lot of people, leave a lot of people staying awake, including the disaster responders. So I guess in terms of learning from what the Pacific does, it's a lot of of listening and giving the communities the leverage for them to represent themselves at the international stage and what they can contribute rather than us, planning for them. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that the examples you use, once again, looking at making sure that the whole mind frame around provision of food security and rations doesn't create dependency but builds into existing infrastructure is something really important. I'll come back to you, Simi, because I actually want to, I think, Bula, you've done a beautiful segue into actually bringing Georgina into the conversation. Because I really, we've talked about listening, we've talked about, it's more than listening, you've got to then practice it. But perhaps from your really deep experience, Georgina, what can we do to better listen to local communities when it comes to DRR around, ensuring that we just don't go in with all the answers?
Thanks, Helen, and thanks to Vuli and Simi. I guess this panel is a really good example of what happens writ large in the Pacific, which is the Fijian people and the Pacific Island people have the expertise, they have the lived experience of disaster, they have hugely complex networks and traditional knowledge and ways of managing disasters. And it was my experience working in Fiji that was often not prioritized by international organizations. So I was working with the Fiji Council of Social Services, and they are a peak body for civil service organizations and volunteers across Fiji. And they're based in Suva, but they have districts, representative district councils all over Fiji. I think when I left, there were up to 21 little councils. And those people are largely volunteers and largely women. And they are incredible first responders. And I loved how Simi spoke about first response from international actors, because there are many jokes that go around, like once cyclones have happened in far off communities that by the time the international organizations arrive or the military, the local Fijian villages have already cleaned up and fixed up and they're back to business as usual. And I think that speaks to really what happens on the ground. But working with the community organizations and volunteers on the ground, I think what I learned was exactly not to go in with an agenda. Like you might be working on a program, you may have KPIs, you may have broad goals, but the things that I saw work most poorly were when people came in saying, "This is how I want something to go, and here I'll dictate how it goes," and no listening, no questions about what's already been done in communities and what's already been tried and what already works really effectively. And in my experience, sitting down and listening to the history, and also another thing is that I think because I had the great privilege of traveling around Fiji to lots of different villages, lots of different districts, the challenges in terms of climate change and disasters are different in all of the villages and all of the places around Fiji, and the response therefore is different, and the localized response is different. So just working effectively, I think, was working out who to speak to, how to listen, how to spend effective time with the communities rather than just going in and leaving very quickly. I think centralizing services in Suva can be problematic because there's a lot of regional Fijian people who miss out. When there's conferences in Suva, when they could be in regional centres like Raki Raki or in the Western districts. But yeah, that was my experience. I learned so much. But yes, I learned to listen even better.
Thank you. And I think we're facing a really interesting time. As I said at the start, we've got reduced funding globally. It's going to happen, and increased needs. And what you're telling us is to be deeply, if I hear correctly, deeply curious. And perhaps, we've really professionalized ourselves as a sector, and so we should, but to perhaps step back from frameworks and KPIs and structures and paradigms and a lot of stuff that gets developed by professionals. And what I'm hearing for you is it's actually efficient, effective, and even more economically viable if we just go in with a different attitude. Is that what I'm hearing, Georgina? It's really about changing, not just listening, but changing the way we approach things.
I think that's 100% right, and asking communities to define where they see the gaps or where they see that they need help. And an example of that was me doing some preventing sexual exploitation and abuse training to villages while I was over there. And whilst I was there, people asking me to give training in how to write a grant, and so that the communities themselves could apply for micro grants so that their little community organizations could run little projects. So then that is like, we were able to be responsive to that and went back and did those grant writing workshops, and some people were successful. So that was a real win, and that was really community led, and not something I would have thought that the community wanted.
Yeah, that's a fabulous example. And I know with RedR Australia, we really, really look at, we think this might be the solution, but what is it really? And not just have our colleagues who are local, but they are the leaders. So that grant writing one is really interesting. I'm sure going in, I'm pretty sure I read what your aims were, and it didn't include grant writing, but wonderful to hear that was a force multiplication. So thank you. Before we move back to Simi and Vuli, Georgina, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about what role do women play in DRR, and particularly in remote communities. And how can we include these women better in what we do? I really took to heart your fact that we very often, governments, authorities, companies, not-for-profits, we centre a lot of our discussion and our discourse in places like Suva, and we miss the other voices. So what would be your advice of how we can do it better?
I think women women at the community level and at the village level are so active. In my experience, because of the women that I was working with, they belong to church groups, they belong to volunteer groups, they're working around the clock for their communities. And what I saw, and whether or not this would work or not, was that a lot of that information isn't known to broader organizations. So I think to be able to feed that information up the line so that big donors and other organizations that are interested in investing know what's already happening. And that includes elderly women, trans women, and women from diverse sexual backgrounds, elderly women. And a lot of these people are remote and they don't get the benefit of going to Suva, going to the conferences. So yeah, I would love their work to be known about and to be highlighted and valued. And I mean, it's valued in the community, but valued more widely than that. And for the women to be recognized as leaders and campaigners and climate action activists, because they really are. They're so impressive.
Thank you. I know there's been a lot of work to be done to take women in places such as conflict, to take the mind frame that they're not just victims, they also have human agency and play extraordinary roles in peacekeeping and ideas around bringing peace. And I think what I'm hearing very clearly from you is we need to amplify this role of powerful women in local communities that don't get access to come to Suva or some of those locations. So thank you. That's a really great thing for us to all know. I'm going to move back to Simi and Vuli, although I'd love to also have your views on this, Georgina, because what I'm hearing is about listening, about practice, but of course, to really listen, you've got to have trust. You can't go in and say, quickly tell me everything and write it down on a clipboard. It's about humans, trusting humans. So perhaps, Vuli, I'll start with you. What role do you believe trust plays in facilitating a partnership and understanding between communities impacted by disaster and international agencies that are involved in responses? And what are some ways we can nurture this trust? I love the saying that, trust comes on foot, but it leaves on horseback. And I think today we could say it leaves on motorcycles. It can be broken very easily and it's fragile, but it's powerful. So, Vuli, what's your views in this space?
Yes, it is. Trust. I guess it's an important pillar in empowering communities for resilience and development. I guess for international agencies, that is it's like a guide that they have to use, or some form of a principle that they have to follow to ensure that not only that they would win the trust of the community and be able to complete whatever projects that they are doing, but also the communities basically, the timing of the intervention is not up to the person creating the intervention externally. So trust is something that, even though it's a sensitive thing and then it can be broken, it also takes time. And many agencies that work in national context, their ability to like Georgina said, to infiltrate the the dynamics of working in the community through representation within the community, using as many networks as you can, using your local counterparts. So being informed about the community context and the national context is something that's also very important. You know, we emphasized that during the essentials for humanitarian practice training. So when international agencies come to a country, they're not only complementing the efforts of response at the country level. They're part of the mechanics of that is building on what the community is already supposed to be doing. So yeah, from I guess what's important for both the community and the international agencies that are working in the community level is making sure that they are consistent in terms of their representation. The communities nowadays, you know, because of their access to technology, their access to information, everybody reads everything, and it's as much as we don't want to say it is possible to respond internationally within a very short period of time. You know, the global response system is becoming increasingly smaller, and access to everything in terms of response is taken for granted because it can come by way of information through social networks. It can come by way of you know, people that are being present in the community at the right time. But having said that, it's important that communities view external actors and people that are, you know, external actors are not the international agencies only. They are also the agencies that are headquartered in a particular place who are saying that they are working in communities. You know, if you're coming into the community and you're from the next community, you are an external player yourself. So these things, you know, it doesn't only affect people that are coming from international level to work in communities. It also affects community by community relationships and their trust building with each other, and also the political dynamics as well is you know, it comes into play when we talk about trust building. And I think the disadvantage that we have at the moment is that the community are so in a period of hangover from so many different promises that they've had over the life of their development, and those things, through no fault of our own, have translated into you know, loss of trust, and you know, by the time you introduce a new concept or, you know, some other ideas, the chances of communities trusting us is so it's an important time, I guess, that we challenge ourselves, practitioners who call ourselves practitioners in this level. We should challenge ourselves with those kind of things to make sure that we do the right thing, be consistent, and listen to what the community, because at the end of the day, we are basically complementing what the communities are supposed to be doing for themselves. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. I think this idea about consistency, which correlates again with if you've got, you know, headquarters, the changing KPIs and donors that are wanting different things, you can look very inconsistent. So I really ties back to Georgina's point. Simi, I'm going to finish with you. We've only got a few minutes left, and there's so much more to say. But I'd really love to hear from you a little bit about this idea of trust. Any positive examples? I think in this current moment, we have to be cautiously, not optimistic, but cautiously working towards better futures, and it can be tough. And so having the moment to talk with all three of you and it's been extraordinary. I've heard from you, as you said, Vuli, this importance of consistency. People know now we can connect online. I've heard from you, Georgina, very clearly this idea of being open, being curious, being outcome driven, impact driven, but not being too structured. But Simi, in the last couple of minutes, what would you like to finish on, particularly as it relates to trust between all the different players that work really hard to ensure there's dignity for people in times of disaster.
Thank you, Helen. For me, it's this statement always rings in my head whenever I do work, uh, which is trust build acceptance, acceptance build ownership, and to gain trust of the people, there's a couple of things that we really need to consider. One is recognition and respect, recognizing the value, recognizing the capacity, and respecting the structure that's there within the community. In every community that we come in, there's already leadership structure that's there. There's already structure around what's the plan of the community. What do they want to do? What are their needs? What are their issues? And what are their priorities? Recognizing and respecting that is really the building blocks towards gaining trust. The other one is listening. They need to feel and see that they are part of the process. This is really important. Going back to the concept of participatory approach, in which when you're coming in to do work, it's not about who is here, it's about who's missing. Asking the question of who else needs to be here and is missing. Enabling and allowing and letting the community know that you care about everybody. And their voices need to be part of the discussions, of the plans, the decision making that's done. And that's really, for me, it's how we build the trust at the community level. And the third one is around practicing what you speak. Sometimes we talk about human rights. Sometimes we talk about enabling space, resources. How does the community seize that in the work and the approach that you are implementing? That is really important. That needs to be seen in how you deliver things. And for me, these are a couple of things that can really provide you with the building blocks to enable the community trust. Because once the community trusts you, and they will accept you as one of their own, they will accept you as somebody who's got influence and voice that can move things within the community, which goes back to the initial statement that I mentioned around trust. It builds acceptance, and then acceptance will build ownership. At the end of the day, for us to ensure sustainability, the community need to feel and they need to own it. They need to own it in order for it to move and the practice remain within the community and they're able to do it sustainably. Yeah? And in order to do that is that listen, respect and recognition, and always you need to show that what you speak is what you do. Thank you very much, Helen.
Vanaka, I could not have summed up this better. I personally have learnt a lot. I always learn a lot listening to my fabulous RedR Australia colleagues and inspirational humanitarian and development colleagues. Thank you very much. If people out there, I'm sorry we didn't get to questions. There's so much more going on. But if people are interested to hear more of these sort of stories, we have RedR Australia has podcasts. We have a web. Please go to our website. We have follow us on LinkedIn, get our newsletter. There is so much more for us all to learn. to explore together, and to move forward to a future where people are protected with dignity. So huge thanks to those who have joined us today, this morning, this afternoon, this evening, and a massive thanks to our extraordinary guests. I really want to thank you, and I look forward to seeing us all together to continue these discussions in other opportunities. Goodbye for now.